Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are recapping the first week of the Major Four qualifiers in the not the qualifying league, the Call of Duty League. So 10 matches last week. We also have 10 more matches, 10 more qualifying matches in the CDL this week. And we're coming down to it. The end of the regular season is nearly here, and the standings they're tightening quite a bit, especially at the 8th place cutoff, where teams they're trying to get in the top 8, whatever they can, to make sure that they can go to the end of season Call of Duty League Championship. But before we talk about any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Long week, but got America's birthday coming up, and got some.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So we had 10 matches, like I said, and we started off with Florida and New York. Florida debuting their roster. I believe
Hello?
you were frozen, I think.
Oh, you froze for me.
All right, we'll just I don't know what happened, but we'll just go over it. We'll start talking again. Not a big deal. As long as you can hear me, let's just go over the matches, because we started with New York versus Florida. Florida debuting their roster with Major Maniac and 2 Real. Those players came into their starting roster, but they didn't have a great showing. They ended up losing to the Subliners 3-1. And I kind of want to pair this match with the Subliners' other match, because this is a team that is interesting, because obviously Crimsix, the most winningest player in Call of Duty League history, probably one of the greatest players of all time. And this team is really underperformed at the majors specifically. They haven't won a single match at the 3 majors so far, and that's really held them back in the standings, and that's why they are in 11th place currently. But with these 2 wins this week, they also ended up beating, in addition to beating Florida, they beat LAG. Both of those teams are ahead of them in the standings, and those 2 wins earned them 20 CDL points, which, they're still in 11th place, unfortunately for them. But now they're only 35 points back from 8th place. So let's talk about New York. What did you think of the Subliners this week? Because 2-0 is great, and it just gets them a little, it cuts it down by, it was at 50 points, now it's at 35 points. Obviously, that keeps going. But what did you think of the Subliners' win over Florida and their win over, what's the other team now that I'm thinking about it?
Guerrillas.
Yeah, over the LAG. So what did you think of that?
Yeah, I thought both of these games were must-win matches for New York heading into this week, and that reflected in our predictions last show that we both thought New York was going to take these. And not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but New York's schedule for this upcoming week is much more difficult on paper than this past week, especially taking into consideration that they were playing 2 teams with recent roster changes and new rosters. So these were absolutely must-win matches for New York, and they took care of business. In particular, the very first match of these qualifiers was a 250 to 246 Tuscan hardpoint, and that's almost a week ago now, so I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I just know, regardless of the indication of the score, it went down to the wire. And it was a super close match, and with Florida taking that, in the back of my head, I'm kind of sitting here, okay, what's going on here? They got a team like Florida bringing in someone like Major Maniac, who's mostly well known for his surge gameplay. Going into that map 2, Florida could be in a good position to take a win here, but New York just comes out and takes the next 3 maps. It was 6-3 in the search. The Tuscan control went to overtime, as a lot of controls do, and then they won by 99 points in the game 4 hardpoint. So it was, like I said, starting out the week, playing against a new roster, all the circumstances based on where they are in the standings, yada yada. It was an essential win for New York, and they took care of business.
Yeah, and when they played LAG, they won it 3-1 as well. And they did end up winning the search and destroys, which are a little bit interesting, and they've been able to win their hard points, which we know that was a point of contention for this team earlier in the year. They were the worst hard point in the league at one point in the season. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that the schedule dictates a lot of what happens in the standings from a week to week basis. In New York's 2 wins, while great, I don't know whether it really shows, if they are one of those top 8 teams, if they can get there. Obviously, a lot of stuff has to go on, and LAG, they lose these matches, and that's very disappointing for them because they need it. They are right on the edge. They are currently the 8th place team. But for New York, this is the best case scenario for them for week 1 of these qualifying matches. They just got to hope that the good things continue, and whatever bad or negative things that they saw from these 2 matches, they kind of subside, and they're able to continue to improve and keep winning matches and ultimately get in the top 8. But that's going to be a tough feat. Let's move on to OpTic versus Boston, which was the second match of the week. And this was ProLuke coming back into the lineup in place of Illy. But things didn't kind of work out how OpTic planned. Boston making their debut with Vivid in place of Capsidol. They end up reverse sweeping OpTic. So they win 3-2. Nero drops 49 in game 4. An incredible game out of him, and the Breach win this 3-2. A much-needed win for them. They're not nearly on the same level as New York or LAG, those teams that are right on the very edge or even in the bottom 4. But they've been really slipping since the midseason break, and they needed at least one win to earn some points, make sure that it's not going to be a really, really tough split for them. What do you think of Boston's win beating OpTic?
Yeah, I think it was an important win for them more than it would have been for OpTic just because of their position in the standings. They obviously not playing with their desired lineup without Illy. They're still in a position, regardless of that, though, where they have enough CDL points where that, contrary to New York situation that we were just talking about, OpTic isn't in like must-win situation. They have a bit of a cushion where they can hopefully get Illy back up to 100% before Champs, because Champs is the one everybody cares about. So although OpTic fans obviously prefer to see OpTic go out and win every single match they play, that's just not likely, and even as much as they want it, it's inevitably not going to happen. So they were close matches before the reverse sweep. I will say that too. It was 250 to 220 on Gavutu Hardpoint and 6-5 in the Bokage Search, where the 2 maps OpTic won. And then Boston with a 3-0 in control, that kind of sticks out to you. They just, when you're facing possibly getting 3-0 swept, and then you win 3-0 in the swing mode there in the middle, that's kind of a big momentum shift. And then the second hardpoint and second search weren't as close as the first 2 maps in those modes. So it was an impressive win for Boston, but similar to New York, kind of in that must-win territory where they didn't have the performance they really would have liked throughout the Major 3 qualifiers and the Major itself. They got a new roster now with Vivid coming in. So still going to need to see more out of Boston personally, but this one is obviously better than the opposite scenario where we're sitting here talking about Boston still losing. They would probably be on a losing streak because I don't remember their exact record in the Major 3 qualifiers, but they lost 2 matches in a row at the Major, or no, they were in the losers bracket. So never mind. They're probably on a couple match losing streak either way. So despite it not being a huge match, like we said, for OpTic, it was important for Boston, and definitely getting a big reverse sweep win here is better than what could have potentially happened on the other hand.
Yeah, they were on a 4-match losing streak heading in. They had Their last win was in the second week of the Major 3 qualifiers over London. London, they had some struggles in the Major 3 qualifiers as well. So it had been a really tough road for Boston, and even with this win, they did end up having another match, and they didn't have the same kind of result, which is unfortunate for them. But staying on OpTic real quick, I really agree with you. It's not that important of what they do now, but getting Illy back, and there were rumors that he might be back sooner than later, maybe a week or two, and we know that the timetable he gave. If that timetable is accurate and things go well, he should be back by the major or by champs. We're not really sure, but things seem like he could be back at some point in the near future, and that's good news for them. I think that they were probably practicing with Illy, in the break between the major in Major 3 and between the Major 4 qualifiers. So going back to Prolute is a difficult situation for them, and it's going to be a little bit of a rough transition as long as Prolute has to stay in the lineup. But now they're probably not going to get the first seed in the CDL. It's not looking very likely, with FaZe improving their record and OpTic not being able to win any of their 2 matches this week. But now they're somewhat in danger of losing second place to Seattle, who, of course, won Major 3. That helps them pick up a lot of points. And Seattle won their match this week. So now they're only 40 points behind OpTic in second place. I think that is very doable, especially if Seattle performs extremely well at Major 4 as they did in Major 3. But it's an interesting storyline that doesn't really have to do with those teams around the 8th place around 8th place in the standings. As far as Toronto and LAG, so LAG, we talked about it. They didn't win either of their 2 matches this week, so they earned 0 points, which is unfortunate for them, and that actually drops them down from 7th place to 8th place. 8th place is still good. 8th place is definitely better than 9th place at this point, but in 8th, they are now only 5 points ahead of 9th place, which is a tie between Florida and Minnesota. Their first match of the week was a 3-2 loss, a reverse sweep loss to the Toronto Ultra, which is incredibly disappointing for LAG because these matches, are pretty much must wins. They don't want to fall out of the top 8 at the last moment and miss out on champs. But this was a particularly hurtful loss for them because they seemed to have it in their grasp, but they just weren't able to finish it out. What did you think of LAG's 3-2 loss to the Toronto Ultra?
Yeah, this was one of those matches where I was kind of in the same boat as you. Coming into this past week, we talked about LAG's roster change, and I know at least I wasn't completely sold on the changes they made, and said that I was going to have to, see what this roster could do and all that. And then they come out against, on paper, a tougher team in Toronto, and they win those first 2 maps, and you're thinking like, okay, maybe this is a sign of good things to come. But Toronto shows the resilience of this roster that we've seen before. Even though they've gotten reverse sweep themselves, and possibly the most historic reverse sweep ever. But regardless, this important bounce back for Toronto here, and probably a match that'll sting Los Angeles for a little bit, especially, you look at this matchup against Toronto. We know Toronto isn't like a super strong hardpoint team, but LAG wins the opening hardpoint on Gavutu 250 to 174. And that's the same first map they play against New York the next day, and they lose by 146 points. So you can say, difference in hard point strengths for the 2 opponents there or whatever, but yeah, it was just in that New York series for LAG, they kind of got smoked in both hard points, whereas they win that opening one on Gavutu against Toronto, and then they only lose by 13 on Tuscan hardpoint in Game 4. So it was a close series, and if you look at the stats, it's even a little bit more perplexing, just because all 4 players on LAG had over a 1.05. Neptune and Spark both had 1.05. Hook dropped to 1.08, and Slasher was at a 1.17. So all four players on LAG were positive in this series, whereas Toronto only has Insight at a 1.13. Everybody else was negative, and Kleenex notably goes 70 and 96 for a 0.73. Um, and you can say whatever you want about Kleenex and classify him. Um, However you would like, I still firmly believe he's the best player on that team, and has a super big impact on the map. And when you're able to get a win, if you're Toronto, when he's dropping a 0.7, that's just, that's kind of nuts. So, very perplexing series if, you're looking at the stats there without having watched it, but it definitely was a close one. And I guess it does show some potential that this new LAG roster could have, but Toronto was able to bounce back and close it out in the end.
That game 4 hard point is the one that sticks with me, and it's probably the one that's going to stick with LAG losing on Tuscan by 13 points. That's a tough loss because it's there. You win that map, you win the series, you're able to get 10 extra CDL points. You're able to hold on to 8th place, or you would actually be holding on to 7th place, and you feel if just a little more comfortable heading into the second week of qualifying matches, because that map started off really well for them. They actually had the lead. I think they were up by like 30-40 points about halfway through, and it just kind of went away like that, and everything kind of spiraled from there. They weren't able to obviously pick up the win on Search and Destroy in Game 5, which is disappointing for them, and kind of indicative of their season. Despite that incredible run that we saw at Major 2 with Spart, they just really haven't had a good season other than that. Without the major run, then they're probably solidly a bottom 4 team. They definitely be in the bottom 4, but they would be more in New York's case, where they have to do really well in these qualifying matches and in the major 4 to really get into the top 8. But because they did so well at that one tournament, things have been a little easier for them, but they really have to win some of these qualifying matches to make sure that they're not out of champs. Let's move on to these other matches, though. We had 4 on Saturday, starting off with Toronto and London. So we went from a Toronto reverse sweep to Toronto losing to London, who was bringing Gizmo back into the lineup. So Gizmo had great success with London. London had great success with Gizmo. They were actually the 3rd place team in the league for quite a bit there, and looked to be solidly a 3rd or 4th best team in the CDL. But London come in and they surprised me. I was not expecting this out of them. They win 3-1. Obviously, Toronto's been a little weird this season, not nearly as consistent as we saw them in the latter portion of last season, but I still expected better. What do you think of London in winning this match?
Yeah, I was in the same camp as you. I've obviously had my doubts about London throughout this year. This certainly wasn't a match I was expecting them to take. I had no expectations for London, really. Well, I haven't had many expectations for them throughout the year, but in particular here, after their recent struggles, flip-flopping the roster a bunch due to Gizmo's personal issues and all that. But yeah, I think, I can't remember exactly. I feel like it was either in round 11 or round 10 of the search. Zero might have gotten ace. I could be completely wrong on that, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure of what I'm thinking of. I just know that the search in this was super close. Obviously went round 11 on Desert Siege, so that's one you probably, looking at the series on paper, you expect Toronto to win the searches here, especially with London playing for the first time. With Gizmo for a bit, they probably weren't practicing search as much as the respawn mode. So that was an important win for London, because then they're able to capitalize on Toronto's, you know, no other way to really categorize it is just hard point struggles throughout the season. That's been well documented at this point. They take both hard points, relatively comfortable over 50-point wins. And then a round 11 search gets you to 3 and, gets a big upset there for London. And like you said, they're probably a team that, obviously played better earlier in the season despite, and now they just haven't looked as strong since, all the stuff going on behind the scenes with Gizmo, everything like that. So it was an important win for them, probably a little bit more of a red flag for Toronto just after, going down early to LAG. Sure, they were able to get the reverse sweep there, but like in a scenario where they weren't able to capitalize like that, they're looking at a potential 0-2 week here with losses to two teams that aren't in the top half of the standings. Maybe London still is because of points, but probably, like power rankings based on recent performances, you would have LAG and London lower than Toronto in most people's opinions, I would assume. So it would have been two upsets if LAG were able to close out that first one, but obviously they survived that series. So the week isn't as bad for Toronto as it could have been, but this is still a tough loss for them, in my opinion.
Yeah, so just to fact check, so Gizmo he aced round 11 and he won the 1v2 against Cammy and Bance. So
It was Gizmo?
yeah, it was Gizmo.
Okay.
Yeah, so he clutched up, and I mean that's an incredible win for them. They definitely needed that. And as far as the standings go, if Toronto had beaten London in this, they would be tied for fourth place. Toronto would be in fourth place and London would be in fifth. But because London won, they maintain a small lead over Toronto. And if they're able to hold on to a top four spot, then that's incredible. It definitely speaks to how consistent they were in the first half of the season, really the first quarter of the season, because they were so good. In the Major 1 qualifiers, Major 1 and Major 2 qualifiers. Things have kind of went downhill since then. But if they're able to do something like this, pull off an upset, beat a team that maybe some people are not really expecting, that's going to be an incredible run for them. Let's talk about New York and LAG a little bit. I know we touched on it, but let's just make sure we go over it a little bit. New York, they win against Florida, and then they win against LAG. I really just want to talk about LAG. Like, how confident are you? So they're 5 points ahead of ninth place, and two teams are in ninth place, or tied for ninth. How confident are you that LAG will stay in the top 8 at the end of this season? With the way that we have very limited material with this current roster, but how confident are you that they're going to be able to secure a spot at champs?
I'm not entirely confident. I think throughout my time covering Call of Duty, I obviously, as you know, and a lot of people watching know how much I appreciated Aches throughout his career. Kind of have the same feeling towards Slasher in the sense that they are guys who would just, they want to do whatever it takes to win.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be tough for me to bet against him, like doing whatever it takes to try and make it the champs. But just like thinking objectively about that, putting that aside, like I think Minnesota is a better team than LAG right now. Obviously, based on just this most recent match, I think New York is a better team than LAG. Obviously, there's a bit more of a gap there. And then Florida, I'm not really sure. I think that's a match that could go either way, but obviously, if they were to play right now, I think it would be a close series and one that could determine which of those two teams is actually in 8th place. So, yeah, I'm not entirely confident that LAG would make it. I think this series in particular against New York, even though they did lose to Toronto, pointed out that all 4 players on the team did have positive KDs, which is a little strange to see in a loss. But it's a reverse sweep, 5-map series. So playing 3 respawns that could affect KDs. But similarly in this series against New York, they play 3 respawns again. They get smoked in the 2 hard points, but they win the control. And regardless of that, it's a series where Hook goes 70-70, has a 1.0, and then everybody else is negative on LAG. So, I still really don't know what to expect from this team. And yeah, I just think it's one of those squads that's in limbo right now until they really show me something. I'm not gonna know what to expect from them, especially when we literally in this sample size of this new roster, we've seen a series where they get reverse swept but put up all 4 positive KDs. Then we see another series where they also lose but put up all 4. I'm not going to say 1.0 is negative, but 1.0 or worse KDs in a loss. So we're seeing 2 different sides of a team. That's a new roster, and just I haven't seen enough, and I don't really know what else to expect from them at this point.
To answer my own question, which is weird, but I would say that LAG is the second worst team in this entire league. I think only Paris is worse than this team because they have this one good run or one great run. Let's say they win a major. They have not earned any points from the majors in Major 1 or Major 3, and they haven't won more than 3 qualifying matches in any of the qualifying stages. So let's say we take away their championship at Major 2. Let's say they win 2 matches in that in Major 2. They win their losers bracket round 1 and losers bracket round 2 matches. They would literally be in 11th place. They would be behind New York right now. And I personally think that that's probably where they are. Like, they lost to New York. They lost to Minnesota, or not New York. Or they lost to New York, but they also lost to Toronto. Toronto is better than New York, better than most teams in the league, at least in the bottom part of the standings. But I can't say that they're better than Florida. I definitely can't say that they're better than Minnesota. So I'm not I think this team's really bad, and that's shocking to me because at the beginning of the year, I thought with the roster that they had, how much talent they had, the veteran leadership that, I love Slasher, one of my favorite players of all time. I think he's incredible. I think he's even underrated at times, but this team has underperformed pretty much every expectation for this entire season, aside from Major 2. But we don't live in a fantasy world. We live in the real world. They did win Major 2, and they have this luxury of at least having a small buffer between them and not making champs right now. That buffer is 5 points. They are 5 points ahead of Minnesota, and they are 5 points ahead of Florida. They're 35 points ahead of New York. So New York is kind of a long shot to make it, but they're in real trouble in making it. And I say that especially because Minnesota is iffy. You don't really know what you're getting. Florida is iffy, but they're still able to beat the bottom teams on like a somewhat consistent basis. I don't know if LAG is. I'm sure they'll beat Paris. Like most teams beat Paris, but they lost to New York, who's in 11th place. I don't think that I'm not convinced that they're able to beat Florida. I'm not convinced that they're able to beat Minnesota. And those teams will jump them with just one win. So I don't know. I can't see a way for LAG unless they do it again in Major 4. They just go on this crazy run, and then we're talking about it like, oh, they're the 4th seed heading into champs, which is a chance, I guess, if they go on a big run. But I just don't see a way for them to make champs if they just continue to underperform as they have for most of the season.
Just looking ahead really quickly, their remaining Major 3 qualifiers are against Atlanta, Boston, and London. Right away, you almost just have to say that you expect Atlanta to be LAG, right? So that would move them to 0-3 in these Major 4 qualifiers, which means that matches against Boston and London are essentially must win. And even if they win those matches, they are only 2-3, which means with tiebreakers and stuff, there's still a chance they don't make the winners bracket heading into Major 4. And if they lose those matches to Boston and London, obviously that hurts their chances even more. And if they're starting Major 4 in the losers bracket, they could potentially be one and done there. And then this isn't really even a conversation at that point, right? I feel like if they, even in a scenario where they split like the matches with Boston and London, then they potentially lose in the first round of the loser bracket at the major. That's 135 points, and they could definitely get bumped by one of those teams below them. So we won't technically see them play like Minnesota or Florida, which obviously that would be a huge matchup if that happened, just because of the immediate implications head to head for the CDL points there. I guess it could happen at the major, but we won't see it in the qualifying matches. But yeah, the LAG, they're definitely in a tough spot, especially with that upcoming match against Atlanta. They're going to have to capitalize on those other two games against Boston and London. Hope that they get the tiebreakers on their side to get into the winners bracket, because that gives them the best chance to potentially get more points, just because obviously if they're in the winners bracket, even if they lose that first match, they're guaranteed to play one more game, as opposed to just starting in the losers bracket and only having potentially one shot.
The good thing for LAG is that Minnesota plays Seattle during their the third week. So let's say Minnesota loses that puts them at 2-2 if they or they're 2-3 or 3-2. Either way, like, it's not great. It's not like they're overwhelming, and they're they might jump LAG. They might not, depending on how LAG does. But it's like LAG or Minnesota and Florida, they also don't have like too hard of schedules. I think New York really got screwed with the scheduling, because they play Seattle, they play OpTic, they play LAT. Like, LAT's, here nor there, but they could be good at sometimes. But OpTic, especially if Illy is back this week, or, I don't know, it's a possibility. And Seattle, like, that's a very tough matchup. And I don't know, like, I think, like, even with all of this, I still think like LAG just I don't think that they can get in. I just don't think. Well, they obviously can. I don't think they will. With Minnesota and even New York, really. Like, I think New York has a really tough road, but LAG. I don't know. I'm saying no. I don't think they're going to be able to make it. But that's why they play the games, and they can prove me wrong for the next 2 weeks. Last match, or no, we have two more matches on Saturday. OpTic versus Minnesota. We alluded to it already, but OpTic, they lost both of their matches this week. Their first loss came against Boston in an upset reverse sweep. This one, Minnesota, like, you predicted it, that OpTic would lose this match, but I don't know. Like, why did you think that Minnesota would beat OpTic?
Well, that's what my rationale for this was. We had seen Minnesota go flawless in the previous online qualifiers, and although they struggled at the major, we still hadn't technically seen this specific Minnesota roster lose one of these online qualifying matches, and that holds true here with this one against OpTic. And maybe I obviously we've seen the core of this Minnesota roster minus Havoc perform on LAN last year, winning one of the most historic comebacks in Call of Duty history. So you can't really say they're onliners or anything like that, but they performed better online recently. And that's what I was leaning into, was just thinking that they could pull something out here with this, especially being online versus their most recent performance on LAN. So really didn't I feel like it wasn't like that hard of a pick, in my opinion, but I'm just saying, based on recent performances and the situation with OpTic's roster and everything like that, I don't know. I think this was a favorable time for Minnesota to play an online match against OpTic, and they were able to capitalize on it there. There was that really interesting 2v6 it was in the control where I think it was Dashy and Proloot pulled off a 2v6 to get the 3-0 sweep in the control for OpTic, and that was the only map OpTic won in the series. But if you also look at the other maps, it's not like this was a blowout by Minnesota by any stretch of the imagination. It was a Bokage hardpoint went to time, 208 to 195. The Bokage search was round 11, 6-5 for Minnesota, and the Berlin hardpoint was a 250 to 236. So outside of OpTic's 3-0 in the control, all three of the maps Minnesota won were extremely close. So despite OpTic obviously not getting their desired results this week, that's still a close matchup against a team that we have yet to see lose in these online qualifiers before the major. And who knows if we see these teams down the road match up with OpTic's intended lineup with Illy.
Yeah. That was the point I was going to bring up, that it was a really close series despite, if you just looked at the 3-1 scoreline, you might not think that.
Yeah.
LAT versus Boston was the final match of Saturday. Boston, they were coming off that big win over OpTic on Friday. Didn't really help them all that much. They end up getting swept by the Thieves, and that's kind of surprising because the Thieves have been, they were 8th place heading into this, so not a great season overall. But it was a rather lopsided win. The hard point was relatively close, 55-point win for LAT, but they kind of took care of business on Berlin Search and Gavutu Control. What do you think of LAT? Because they, we've talked about it a lot this season, how up and down they've been, very similar to Florida. You don't really know what you're going to get with them, but they end up winning here. What do you think?
Yeah, I honestly don't even really remember the series.
That's fine.
I think it might have been a quick one, and I really don't remember it. I do think I saw on like one of those clips, YouTube channels, that Methods was talking about the connection, which was something I'm pretty sure I brought up about this match on the last show. If it wasn't this one in particular, it's something we've talked about on the podcast before, just due to Los Angeles Thieves actually playing from Los Angeles. In this situation, Boston actually playing from Boston. That's literally the furthest you can get across the U.S. and probably caused some ping issues. So I didn't look too much into it, but I do think I saw Methods at least mention it in one of those clip videos, so that could have played a factor here. But regardless, this is a situation where it was a 3-0 stomp, and all of the Boston players were negative. All the Thieves players were positives. Kenny in particular goes 73 and 46 for a 1.59. I feel like that might be like one of the best stat lines he's produced in Vanguard. It's just been like one of those games where, he's been going between roles and stuff. We haven't seen, really like the superstar numbers we've seen from Kenny in the past in different games. So, despite whatever ping situations there might be, or online drama, regardless of all that, Thieves took care of business here and got a win against a team that you expect them to beat.
The first match of Sunday, Seattle versus Paris. We kind of expected it. Paris, they lose 3-0. It is just another loss. It's their 18th of 20 matches in this regular season. They have a 10% win percentage, which is actually pretty cool. They are not officially eliminated from playoff contention, but I think with one more loss officially puts them out, because they are currently 105 points behind 8th place, which you only can get 65 from a major. That's if you win. And, I guess technically 2 more losses would eliminate them, because then they couldn't even get 105 points. But they would, they're currently able to get 115, in their dreams. But I don't see it happening. I don't know how much you really want to talk about Seattle versus Paris, because it's literally, the defending major champions against the team that hasn't won in like 2 months.
Yeah, I don't think we have to spend too much time. It definitely would have been a bigger topic for us if Seattle struggled in this, or
Yeah.
God forbid they actually lost this series. There would be more for us to talk about in that scenario. But this, is what you expect from Seattle here, coming off their major victory. I will say Johnny did make his CDL debut for Paris here, coming in for John, and looking at the stats in particular for this one. He ends the series at 55 and 71, which is a .77 KD, and you might think he really struggled in the series, but if you look further, he went 12 and 7 in the search and destroy. So let me do some quick math. 55 minus 12 is 43, and 71 minus 7 is 6 is 64. Yeah, so he would have won 43 and 64 in the respawns in this series, which is obviously still rather negative, especially when he goes almost double positive in the search. So bit of a I don't know. Obviously, it's a tough debut going up against the most recent champions, but just thought it was worth bringing up those numbers. Like, if you look at the end of the series numbers, you might have thought that Johnny just got smoked throughout the entire series, but he did have a good search map. So at least there's that for him in this one in particular.
Yeah, your stats are always going to be, I would hope they're going to be pretty bad when you're on a bad team. Like, that's, that's usually how it is, unless you're like Octane on Seattle in like 2020 or whatever, where he was dropping like 1.5s and they were getting crushed. It's just not a usual occurrence that he'd be having great stats. But I just want to point out that it's been 97 days since Paris has won a match. So we're looking at triple digits unless they pull off a win in the next 3 days. It's always possible, but it's probably looking at 100 straight days without a win, which is pretty disappointing for them. Florida versus Minnesota. This was another sweep, but kind of an unexpected one. Minnesota, you pointed out they hadn't lost any of these online qualifying matches with this new roster. They were 6-0, but they were swept by Florida, which is just really weird, because these teams, they're pretty much cannibals. They're just eating each other at the bottom. They're, both these teams are obviously trying to get into the top 8, and with this win, they remain tied for 9th place. Like I mentioned a few times on the show today, they're 5 points back from 8th place. But so it's an incredible win for Florida. Definitely much needed to keep pace with Minnesota, to put them in a spot where with one win and an LAG loss, they can hop into the top 8 as long as Minnesota doesn't stand in their way. You have any thoughts on this series in particular?
I just, it was very surprising to me. Obviously, was talking up Minnesota earlier in the show, and we both predicted Minnesota to take this one. But it's an impressive win for Florida. But it's also, goes without saying, this was Major Maniac's revenge, playing up against the team that most recently dropped them. So you don't, I'm not going to sit here and say that Major Maniac playing against his former team is the only reason Florida won, but you got to imagine he was incredibly motivated heading into this series, and that could have played a factor in it, and, rightfully so. It was a good showing from him. I think I didn't pull up the stats before we started talking about it, but I think he had a pretty good series.
Oh, he did, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, he goes 67 and 48 for a 1.4. Most kills in the series, fewest deaths in the series, highest KD in the series. So, there's an impressive win for Florida. Good for Major Maniac. Again, always been a player I've enjoyed watching throughout his years in competitive Call of Duty, and he gets a big win against his former team. So, I still It might be weird to say it just because of this recent result, but I feel like Minnesota is still the better team than Florida. But um, I guess that goes to show like they're tied in CDL points, so maybe it just makes sense that they're in that position for a reason. Both teams went 1-1 this most recent week, so I just still gonna need to see more out of this new Florida squad. But this was undoubtedly a win I wasn't expected. It's cool for the storyline, and good on Major Maniac.
To kind of prove what kind of team Florida is, like, how we talked about how they've been so inconsistent. You don't really know what you're going to get every time they're playing. They're 5-6 since the midseason break. Like, I mean, I would not be shocked if the next match they win that match and then they're 6-6. Like, but then they'll probably lose to go 6-7. It's kind of their thing. And maybe with Major Maniac and 2 Real, they're going to be able to get some consistency and be able to bottle whatever they had in this series and bring it to every series. But I'm not going to hold my breath on it because they also lost to the Subliners 2 days earlier. So it's a difficult thing to predict for them. But I mean, it was a great win for them, and it will. I mean, it keeps me interested because now we have 2 teams that are just like that far away from getting into the top 8. So we're, it's going to be a really interesting fight between Florida and Minnesota, but definitely Florida got the better of the rocker on this one. And let's talk about the final matchup of the week was LAT versus Atlanta. We both picked Atlanta. Atlanta did end up winning the series, but I kind of got whiplash from watching this series because these teams just kept like beating each. Obviously, it goes to Game 5, but just a pretty incredible series. I think LAT and Atlanta might have had a similar series at some point in the season. Maybe it was OpTic and LAT, but I remember. I remember LAT being involved in one of these series where they get kind of crushed in one map, then they come back and they do the crushing, and then it keeps going like that. It was a similar instance here. They win that first Gavutu hardpoint, and they just absolutely stomp FaZe, and then they don't even win a round in Search and Destroy. Then they win control, then they lose hardpoint, and then it comes down to Bokid, Search and Destroy, and it just didn't go LAT's way on that map. They go 0-6. Octane, between the 2 Search and Destroys, went 0-12. I don't know how often that's happened in Call of Duty where you play 2 searches and the same player goes 0-12 or drops a donut in general. I got to get your thoughts on this series because we didn't expect FaZe to lose, and I mean, if you just looked at the searches, they weren't even close. But this was a pretty interesting series, top to bottom.
Yeah, I think just on your first point, I'm trying to find Major 2. No, Major 2 is when LAG won. So I think there was a situation at one of the majors where like the Thieves played OpTic and FaZe back to back, and they were both like super close series. And like the Thieves beat one of them, and then lost to the other one. I can't remember, but I think that's what you're thinking of from earlier in the season.
Yeah.
Regardless, that's not what we're talking about now. This was another close series here, kind of like you said. Regardless of the double 6-0s and the 0-12 from Octane, LAT winning 2 matches against FaZe is still pretty impressive, all things considered, and probably a bit closer outside of the 6-0s than some people might have expected out of this matchup going into it. I will say the control was super. It was arguably, I think I saw Tactical Rab tweet it, that it was like his favorite control of the season, and off the top of my head, it was definitely one of the most entertaining controls. There was Atlanta had back-to-back offenses in round 4 and 5, and they got down to like being a tick away on B in both rounds, and it came down to lives in both of those rounds, and LAT just clutched up. Kenny in particular had like a pretty sweet double nade to seal the overtime win there in control. But yeah, I think in the long run here, the big picture, or however you want to word it, the the match might have been a little bit closer than some people expected, but still a double 6-0 in search is very noteworthy. The only other thing that comes close to it in my recent memory is we've talked about it a couple times in Cold War, one of the first times when OpTic played Atlanta FaZe in search, it was like a 6-0 and a 6-1. I don't think it was a double 6-0, but it was one of those series where Atlanta took care of business against OpTic and they just dominated both searches. So it might not have been a double 6-0 like it was here, and not against OpTic, all that, the different circumstances, but we have seen dominant search performances out of Atlanta in the past, and that's something obviously Tupac and the boys behind the scenes at FaZe are probably going to be thrilled about, regardless of the circumstances and everything going on with the match. And we haven't seen Atlanta win a major yet this year, but they've been in the grand finals of all three. So if they're able to, obviously they looked really strong in the search in this series in particular, but if they're able to put it all together and all three of the game modes, then we know just how talented this squad is and what they're capable of heading into the most important events of the year.
I found the series that we were talking about. So it was in the major 2 qualifiers, LAT versus OpTic, and OpTic 100-point clubbed LAT in the hard point. Then LAT won 6-0 on the search. OpTic wins 3-0 on the control. LAT wins Berlin hardpoint for game 4, and then it goes to a round 11 Tuscan Search and Destroy where OpTic wins. In a different, a different set of circumstances, Octane was like the best Search and Destroy player in this entire series for LAT. Might have been, I think he was the best in the entire series regardless of team. He went 6-2 in the first S&D, and then went 12-7 in game 5 despite the loss. Obviously things have changed. It was a little bit different. FaZe is a little bit different of a team than OpTic, obviously, but I thought it was interesting that LAT, that just kind of shows who they are, is like they're very inconsistent, and I think everybody agrees that they have the talent to be a very good team, but things have just kind of not went their way, and it seems like maybe they'll be able to get some of that back if they are able to shore up a little bit of the search and destroy play. But definitely a tough loss for them, and tough loss for their fans, and definitely a tough loss for Octane, because double donuts, that's crazy. Let's talk about the predictions. So I went 6-4 last week. You went 7-3, so you're ahead by 4 matches in total. But let's go through our predictions. Let's want to talk about the standings real quick before we do that. Do the predictions. So obviously FaZe up at the top. They have 270 points. They're 45 points, ahead of OpTic. OpTic has a 40-point lead over Seattle. Seattle has a 25-point lead over London, and that's where things really start to get close. There's only 10 points separating London between Toronto, and then Toronto is 10 points ahead of Boston in 6th place. 10 points ahead of LAT in 7th place, and LAT and LAG, the 7 and 8, they are separated by 5 points. And if the season had ended today, the bottom 4, the teams that would not make champs, Minnesota, Florida, New York, and Paris. Paris, as we've discussed, is all but out of it. They're almost officially eliminated from playoff contention. New York, they're 35 points back in 11th place from LAG in 8th. Definitely, it's doable. It's going to be tough. But if LAG keeps slipping, Minnesota and Florida, they're inconsistent. It could happen, but it's going to be a tough road, especially with their schedule. And then Minnesota and Florida tied for 9th place at 120 points, which is just 5 points behind LAG. It's going to be a really interesting last few weeks of qualifying matches, and the major will be very important. And I think this is the most important that seeding has ever been for a major, because having that buffer in the winner's bracket, being able to lose one match without being eliminated, seems more important than ever in my mind, just for the fact that you could have a chance to even get 10 points at the major rather than go home with 0. So I'm interested to see how things work out for the rest of the season. And let's go through our predictions. So Friday, July 1st, the beginning of July, which is pretty crazy. We have 3 matches: Atlanta versus Toronto, Minnesota versus London, and Seattle versus Boston. Starting at the top, I think we both agree Atlanta probably beat Toronto, but maybe we'll see a rejuvenated Toronto come out. Atlanta seemed to be a little off kilter, I guess, if that's the right word. But we agree on that. Minnesota versus London. I almost want to go with London, but Minnesota is still 6-1 in these qualifying matches, so I'm gonna go with the Rocker. I'm rocking with the Rocker.
Yep.
And Seattle versus Boston. Can't pick against Seattle at the moment, so I'm gonna go with the Surge.
Correct.
And 4 matches on Saturday, July 2nd. Florida versus London, OpTic versus Paris, Seattle versus New York, and Atlanta versus LAG. I'm gonna go with London over Florida.
Wow.
I mean,
you've been on the Florida train before this. You know, is this like the LAG merch last year?
Well, it's kind of like that train broke down several times, and then I'm just thinking, okay, the next time we're probably just gonna fall off the tracks. I don't really know about Florida. Maybe this will motivate them. My pick against them, that'll motivate them to keep their winning ways and get into the top 8. So you're going with Florida?
I am definitely going with Florida. Haven't been a London picker for most of the season, not changing here.
Maybe I'm just a gizmo guy now. OpTic versus Paris. Man, it's gonna be a tough matchup. I gotta say, the Legion, they've been looking strong lately. No, I'm going with OpTic.
Me too.
The Surge versus the Subliners. I gotta, like, why would I pick against Seattle? Even though New York did look very good in the first 2 matches, this is a step up in competition from playing the guys that are either in the middle of the pack that have been struggling for most of the season or lower, LAG and so forth. So I'm gonna go with the Surge.
Yeah, this was one for me where I really, just because of the storyline of like Subliners making that late season push for potential champs, Crimsix trying to avoid missing his first champs, all that. I really want to pick New York here, but I just don't think I can. It would be, a really big win for them, but still, we haven't seen Seattle lose since they won that major, so I'm going to go with Seattle. But this is definitely one I have highlighted, in the back of my mind. I'm looking forward to seeing exactly how these squads match up because, if Seattle does come out and just smoke New York, like, you could look at it 2 ways. You could say, they're defending champs, not much to take away from it, but it could also be like one of those like really super demoralizing losses for New York, as opposed to if they're able to, make it a very competitive series, or if they're able to actually win it. That could be a very big confidence boost, huge for them in the CDL point standings, all that. So I really am looking forward to this match more than other storylines or things that it might be a match that might fly under the radar for other people. I'm really looking forward to it.
I think any match involving New York for the time being has to be must watch because, like you mentioned, Crimsix, he's on this hopeful path of getting to champs again. This team trying to make a late season run would definitely be a very impressive run if they're able to get into the top 8. And they have a very, very difficult schedule this week in particular. Seattle is very tough, and then they have OpTic as well. So I still think Seattle, but I see your point about New York, and I think that it's very possible that this kind of motivation, this outside motivation at least, to get into champs, the pressure of keeping Crimsix in that run of champs, I think that it might help them and might propel them to a win over Seattle. But we'll see on Saturday. Final match of Saturday: Atlanta versus LAG. Gonna stick with FaZe. the Guerrillas. Like I said, I think they're the second worst team in the league. I don't think I should probably pick them over Atlanta.
Yeah, going with the FaZe boys here.
Final 3 matches on Sunday, July 3rd. Boston versus LAG, LAT versus Paris, and OpTic versus New York. Boston versus LAG, I'm going to pick Boston, but I don't see... Like, this is a really difficult match because neither of these teams have been playing well for like a month and a half.
This is almost like a lose-lose just from a prediction standpoint because you could really pick either team and they could both let you down. So I'm going to go LAG here just because I actually don't really have too good of a reason. I don't have high expectations from either of these squads right now. But we did see, both teams show some glimmers of potential. So definitely could see either team winning. I'll just go LAG.
The Thieves versus Paris. I mean, I think it's going to be 100 days without a win for the Legion. I'm not really sure how they could. I see how they could beat LAT. Like we mentioned, they're up and down, and if the Legion catch them on a down day and they just haven't had good practice, they're not feeling it, I could see it happening. Much more likely than Paris beating OpTic, in my opinion, but I still think the Thieves are better than that. I think, especially now that they know, okay, we're in 7th place. We got to just keep this, if we keep winning, we'll stay in 7th place. We'll stay in the top 8. So I got to think that the Thieves are going to be able to beat Paris.
Going LAT too.
And the final match of the week, OpTic versus New York. Like we just said when we were talking about the Seattle-New York match, I think all of the Subliners matches, you got to watch them. I mean, you never know how much time your favorite players have left of their competitive careers. I didn't take it seriously enough that Clayster might be done as a pro player. There's a very real possibility. We've seen it with Karma. We've seen it with TP, many other players, of course. But you got to appreciate them for when they are there. And I sure am going to appreciate Crim6 this week and in the following weeks to come. I'm still going to pick OpTic over the Subliners, but I think it's very possible especially if Pro Loot is in the lineup and things are just not clicking the same way they were maybe a month ago. I could see it going the Subliners' way, but I'm going to go with OpTic.
Yeah, I'm going to go New York here. We did, so it would have been that wouldn't make sense if they played in the last qualifiers. When did OpTic played New York and New York won? And Krem had a funny interview. I can't think of when it was. I feel like it was in the last qualifiers, but that wouldn't make sense because I thought each team plays each other twice in the qualifiers. It's 5 matches.
Yeah, it was the last the major 3 qualifiers.
Yeah, and New York won, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's weird.
Just I guess that's how the schedule worked out. They couldn't figure a way to split them up like half and half, like in the first half and the second.
Because you play 5 matches for the qualifiers, so that's only 20 matches too.
Well, that's the problem with their
overlap.
Yeah, with their format and having 12 teams.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't even thought about that till just now. But regardless, yeah, this is a match we've already seen New York have some success against. OpTic could be a bit of a different situation if Illy's playing in this match, but for the sake of the storyline, I'll go with New York here.
Yep, so that does it with our predictions. Make sure to, if you're interested, tune in. It's on the Call of Duty League YouTube channel. So this is the second to last week of the regular season. We're going to get another week of qualifying matches next week, and then we're going to the major. Well, we're not going. Well, you might be going to the major. I'm not going to the major, and these teams are definitely going to the major. Some of these teams will not be going to champs. Which is probably the biggest sticking point for some of them. But yeah, that does it for the show. I don't really know if there are there's any other news that we missed. I know that Toronto Ultra Academy NA changed their roster despite winning the Elite in Challengers, which I found that interesting. It was like less than 24 hours after winning Elite, they decide to just change their roster and pick up Assault. So, I mean, if you're really into Challenger stuff, if you're really into roster mania stuff, you should just be watching Challengers Twitter, because that's usually where it happens. Like, teams are winning events and literally just dropping their roster. So, I mean, if you're really interested in that, make sure to, I don't know, follow like Crohn's Twitter or something to keep up with everything. But what'd you have to say?
I was just gonna bring up. It was announced earlier this week the official end, or the sunsetting of the Team Envy brand.
Oh yeah,
However you want to word it. Obviously, that doesn't really affect the Call of Duty community anymore, following the OpTic Envy merger, creating OpTic Texas there in Call of Duty. But I
yeah.
believe it was the Envy Rocket League team was like the last official team under Envy that's now under OpTic. So they're just not going to be using the Team Envy brand anymore. For longtime Call of Duty fans, that's obviously it's right up there with OpTic and FaZe as one of the most historic brands in Call of Duty.
Yeah, definitely.
I would have to look at the specific numbers, but I know at one time before the CDL era, obviously, Envy was like the most successful organization at COD Champs in particular. They had the win there in Black Ops 3. They came in second in Black Ops 2 and in Ghosts with the roster with Rambo that made the losers bracket run. So yeah, it's really just a historic brand. One of my favorite brands, in particular. When the Empire was formed, and they had the tribute there with like the N and the V for the crown or whatever. I thought that was super cool. It's at least a touch to the history that Envy has had in our scene, but now it's just effectively gone. So it had to have been a tough decision for Hastro, obviously, but
Definitely.
probably one that makes sense for the business. So yeah, that was the only other thing I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, so they finished second, I believe, 3 times at champs, which that kind of sucks, but it doesn't necessarily suck for their wallets, because JCap in particular was a part of many of those rosters for Envy. Like I saw a few Twitter prompts of like, who's the first player that you think of when you see the Team Envy logo. For me, it's JCap. I mean, I came in during Black Ops 2. He was on that Envy roster with Proofy and Stainville and Rambo.
That's my answer.
Yeah, Rambo. Stain?
Yeah.
I also thought of Stain too, to be honest with you. But yeah, Rambo Ray, I think he's probably a lot of people's answers, because he was like the typical like Envy guy. He was the captain of the team. I also, I think of Hastro, and deservedly so. The co-founder, co-owner of the organization. Definitely like with OpTic, FaZe, and Envy, like those organizations really like spearheaded Call of Duty esports in a big way. And it's sad to see the Envy brand go, but I'm glad that we still have many of the same people. Rambo is working with OpTic, and Hastro of course owns it. But it's a sad day that it's going away officially, but it was fun while it lasted, and I'm glad that we got to experience a lot of those champs. I'm sure the 2017 champs, that was IW, I believe.
Yep.
That was a tough loss for Envy. I'm sure that some Envy fans will hope to forget that. I think it was JCap's weak arm, couldn't get the uplink ball in or something like that. But overall, I think Envy fans probably have a lot of good memories, and partnering with OpTic, even though they're technically rivals or whatever, they have a pretty bright future with Shotzi and Illy, and who knows how long Scump will play, and Dashy's been incredible. So I think Envy fans, as long as they're OpTic fans, of course, have been treated pretty well over the past year or so. But yeah, so long to Envy. And yeah, you want me to wrap up the show if you have anything else?
Yeah. No, it's fine.
So subscribe, follow the feed, whatever you do. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, everywhere that you listen to podcasts. We probably are on there. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter. He's at jbink with 2Ks. I'm at Preston Byers. The podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show will be next week. Sometime next week we'll update you guys. We'll go live or whatever. And just make sure to follow, subscribe to the feeds, and you'll get us there. But yeah, thank you for all your support. We're coming down to the very end of the season. But it's been a fun season, despite, people just dumping on Vanguard most of the time. But, it's fun to talk about the CDL. It's fun to talk about these roster moves, and it's fun to talk about the matches. And we're going to get some very contested matches over the final 2 weeks of the regular season and then at the major. But yeah, that does it for me. Take it over, Bink.
Short and sweet this week. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the most recent matches. Obviously, we got a holiday weekend coming up here in the U.S., so Happy 4th of July to everybody in the U.S. If you're gonna miss some of the matches this weekend due to festivities, and
miss the Paris matches.
It's obviously a little bit understandable. So if you do happen to miss any matches over the weekend, hopefully you'll tune into our next show whenever it is next week, and we'll be able to give you all the details that you need to know for whatever you missed. So yeah, thanks as always, and remember to send the chow.